Part 8. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 71. Chen Tao looked at Ziking's big eyes with surprise. He looked at her and said, "Well, be careful not to be seen by others in the future, I'm worried that it will cause trouble." "Well, I know, but how could it be?" Ziking's eyes turned into doubt. Before Ziking asked the question she wanted to ask, he leaned in and kissed her. Ziking couldn't speak, all she could do was close her eyes. 3 hours later. Chen Tao stood by the bed and put on his clothes. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt someone approaching from behind. A slender arm wrapped around Chen Tao's waist, and the beauty behind him came close. Chen Tao could smell the fragrance coming from behind. He turned his head slightly and saw Ziking leaning on his back. He turned around and looked at Ziking. Ziking looked at Chen Tao with big eyes, her delicate face was flushed, and there was a smile on her face. Her big eyes were like a pool of lake water, clear to the bottom. Chen Tao gently hugged Ziking's waist, raised his hand, lifted her hair, and put it behind her ears. He looked at her and said with a smile, "Are you still tired?" Ziking pursed her lips, smiled, and shook her head, "I feel energetic. Today, you can go wherever you want. I will accompany you." Of course she felt energetic. The genes in her body had been reshaped. Although Xingyun didn't say it, Chen Tao could guess that Ziking's new genes should be of the same level as Chen Tao's. Otherwise, she would not have an infinite lifespan. With such a super gene, she certainly wouldn't feel tired so easily. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Then change clothes, I don't want others to take advantage of you." Ziking hummed and said, "I'll listen to you, then wait at the door." Hearing this, Chen Tao blinked. He smiled, "Okay." Although Chen Tao was already very familiar with Ziking, Ziking was still thin-skinned. Chen Tao chose to respect Ziking's request and he went out. Waiting quietly. About 10 minutes. Chen Tao heard the noise coming from the door. The door was opened. Ziking walked out of the house. Looking at Ziking in front of him, Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly. Ziking was wearing a cotton white camisole shirt, which was close-fitting and fitted her figure. Her waist was grasped and her bust was amazing. Paired with a pair of blue tight jeans, which fit her straight and slender long legs, and a pair of black round high heels on her feet, the whole person looked tall and perfect. A head of ink-like long hair, naturally draped over her shoulders, matched with that gorgeous face, the whole person was full of the unique charm of a mature woman. When Ziking saw Chen Tao, she smiled, turned around in front of Chen Tao, then looked at Chen Tao and asked, "Is this okay?" Chen Tao smiled, "Of course, it's beautiful." Ziking was also happy, her eyes were full of joy. She approached Chen Tao, holding Chen Tao's arm, she looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Well, let's go, where are we going this time?" Chen Tao said, "It's almost evening now, and it's almost time for dinner. How about we go out for dinner together?" Ziking nodded slightly. Although the meals made by number 3 are indeed delicious, you have to go out for a walk occasionally, and having dinner outside is also a good thing. Chen Tao took Ziking downstairs together. As soon as he went downstairs, he saw He Yuxuan sitting on the sofa watching TV. Chen Tao didn't care about He Yuxuan. He looked at number 1 standing next to him and said, "Number 1, there's no need to prepare dinner for Ziking and me." Number 1 had a signature smile on his face and said, "Okay, master." Chen Tao walked out with Ziking. "Are you going out for dinner?" He Yuxuan's voice came from behind. Chen Tao paused slightly and looked at He Yuxuan. He Yuxuan crossed her legs, looked at the side with big eyes, and said with a smile on her face, "If you are going out on a date, I suggest you put on a mask. Ziking doesn't need it, but you do. There are all your photos on TV now. If you are recognized, then this date will be ruined." Chen Tao's heart moved. Yes, Chen Tao is now a celebrity in Tal district, and his appearance is probably known to everyone in the entire Tal district. If you follow him out like this, it will be difficult to enjoy a date quietly. Thinking of this, Chen Tao said in his heart, Xingyuan, write an ordinary mask. Received the instruction, started to write. A mask appeared out of thin air in front of Chen Tao. Chen Tao stretched out, took it, and put it on his face. He took Ziking out of the door. He Yuxuan stared at the scene in a daze. Chen Tao, is he a magician? He Yuxuan smiled, whether he is or not, he was really handsome just now, worthy of being the man I like. She recalled it a little bit like a fangirl, which is not surprising, after all, which girl would not be a fangirl when she meets her beloved man? Chen Tao didn't know that a casual action just now made He Yuxuan obsessed for a long time. If he knew, he would probably keep silent. Chen Tao took Ziking out of the villa and picked her up. The ring turned into white light, and the light condensed behind him and turned into a pair of wings. Ziking was slightly startled. She looked at the pair of wings, and then looked at Chen Tao. She had doubts, but she didn't ask, just hugged Chen Tao's neck and looked at this man quietly. Spreading his wings, Chen Tao held her and flew into the sky. There were many people outside the iron gate. If he didn't do this, even with a mask, he would be surrounded by those crazy reporters. Of course, Chen Tao could use some tricks to get those reporters to leave, but Chen Tao was too lazy to waste time. He flew away from Yuehu Manor and found a place to land. Chen Tao put Ziking down, and the wings turned into rings and returned to his fingers. Chen Tao looked at Ziking and said, "Let's go." Ziking hummed, "Very well behaved." Ziking took Chen Tao's hand, and the two walked on the road. There was a Western restaurant in front. The two entered the Western restaurant. "Sir, what do you need?" Chen Tao just sat down, and the waitress came over. Chen Tao said, 2 beef ribs, medium rare, with black pepper sauce, and 2 lemon juices. Okay, the waitress nodded. The waitress left. Ziking looked at Chen Tao, she looked quietly, didn't say anything, with a gentle smile on her face. The two of them waited quietly for the meal to be served. But Chen Tao and Ziking didn't know. When they came in, a pair of eyes had been staring at this side, to be exact, staring at Ziking. What a beautiful girl, I don't know where she came from, why didn't I see her on this street before? The one who spoke was a handsome blonde man sitting not far away. The man stared at Ziking with a playful smile on his face. Boss, good taste, that woman's figure, those legs. Simply another man squinted his eyes and smiled, "Boss, do you want it?" The blonde man squinted his eyes and said, "Beautiful woman, of course I can't let her go." He stood up. Holding the red wine, he walked straight towards Ziking. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 72. The blonde man walked up to Zicheng. There is one more person next to you, which of course attracts more attention. Zicheng turned her face and looked this way. Saw the blonde man. The blonde man caught Zicheng's gaze, smiled, and said, "What do you call a beautiful woman?" Zicheng was slightly startled, and she frowned. Got accosted? Zicheng didn't like being talked to. She looked away and didn't intend to pay attention to the blonde man. When the blonde man saw this, he pulled up a chair, put the red wine glass in his hand on the table, and sat at the table on Chen Tao's side. He looked at Zicheng and said with a smile, "I asked the beauty's name without introducing myself. It's really not good. So please introduce me. My name is Lin Feng. Let me introduce myself. The largest mobile phone service provider in Tal District, Lin Shan, the chairman of Lei Company, is my father." This self-introduction directly revealed his net worth. With this move, he clearly understood that this guy was planning to pursue Zicheng. Chen Tao frowned slightly. The problem is, This guy looks down on people so much that he just ignores Chen Tao. Lin Feng looked at Ziyi Qing, the corners of his mouth raised slightly. Lin Feng's identity represents wealth and power. The largest mobile phone service provider in Tal district is a very profitable company. As the son of the chairman of the board, Lin Feng's identity represents wealth and power. That can be a great tool for picking up girls. So far, Lin Feng has rarely encountered a girl who wouldn't be moved after hearing this identity. But Lin Feng looked at Ziyi Qing and found with some confusion that Ziyi Qing was not surprised to hear his identity. She just glanced at the masked man next to her subconsciously, without even looking at Lin Feng. Lin Feng frowned slightly, his eyes fell on the masked man, and he said, "Who is this?" Seeing Lin Feng looking at him, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Of course, through the mask, others could not see his expression. Chen Tao said, "The girl you are chatting with is my lover." Lin Feng was startled. Although Lin Feng couldn't see Chen Tao's face, he could hear Chen Tao's voice. The voice was indifferent and seemed a little unhappy. "Can you still be so indifferent when you hear about your identity?" Lin Feng felt that this man and woman were different from the others. Lin Feng smiled and said, "So, this woman is your thing." Chen Tao frowned. This sentence made Chen Tao feel a little uncomfortable. Lin Feng said, "I want this woman. You give me a price and I buy it?" Chen Tao glanced at Lin Feng through the mask and said lightly, "Just you." Lin Feng was startled and said, "Haha, what do you mean it's just me?" At this time, a man next to him came over and said with a smile, "Where are you country bumpkins from? You would actually ask such a question to Boss Lin Feng." Boss Lin Feng, that is the son of the chairman of Tier Company. His assets are beyond your imagination. If you are smart enough, hand over this woman. I guarantee that the wealth I, Boss Lin Feng, will give you will make you happy. The man said, and he smiled and said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Li Heng, and I am an employee of Tier Company. Staff. Looks more like a flatterer." Listening to what Li Heng said, the smile on Lin Feng's face became even more proud. Lin Feng looked at Chen Tao and said, "How is it?" Chen Tao said calmly, "No interest, get out of the way and don't disturb our meal." Chen Tao was a little unhappy, but he couldn't just do it in someone else's restaurant just because he was unhappy. In this case, it will not only affect other people's business, but also affect Chen Tao and Ziyi Qing's dining. Very troublesome. It would be best if Lin Feng could retreat when he saw the difficulties, and if Lin Feng could get out of his own way. Lin Feng was slightly startled, and his eyebrows suddenly furrowed. "You guy." Lin Feng stood up with a gloomy face, "You look down on me, don't you?" He was a little irritable. "Who is he?" "His dad is the chairman of Tier Company. According to Lin Feng's status, what can he not get if he wants?" Now that Lin Feng has spoken to this extent, this guy actually asked them to get out of the way. "What's the meaning?" Chen Tao said lightly, "Who looks down on whom? Did you misunderstand something?" Lin Feng raised his eyebrows and said, "Haha, oh, that's interesting. Do you still think I should think highly of you? Who are you? You dare to compare with me, Lin Feng? My dad is the director of Tier Company chief. What about you? Just two idiots." Lin Feng continued, "I should look down on you, but what you just said is not giving me face." After speaking, Lin Feng raised the wine glass in his hand and threw it directly at Chen Tao's face. Chen Tao frowned slightly. The water thrown by Lin Feng was about to splash on Chen Tao's face. Suddenly, the water changed its direction strangely, and flew back to Lin Feng just like the two missiles that attacked Yuehu Manor before. Crack. A soft sound. Lin Feng took a step back. His entire face was covered with alcohol. He quickly wiped the drink from his face with his hands and shouted, "What's going on? What did you do?" When Li Heng looked at it, he quickly picked up the napkin and wiped Lin Feng's face. He said, "Boss, don't move. I'll wipe it clean for you." Li Hung. "You don't need to wipe it, I'll do it myself." Beat him to death. Lin Feng grabbed the napkin and wiped the wine on his body. He stared at Chen Tao and roared with hatred on his face. When Li Hung heard this, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Chen Tao. "You heard it too, I didn't mean to hit you, you provoked someone you shouldn't have." Li Hung rushed towards Chen Tao. He punched Chen Tao in the face. Li Hung's fist was about to hit Chen Tao. Suddenly, Li Hung's body position changed out of thin air. Lin Feng's pupils condensed, and a fist enlarged in front of him. Bang! Lin Feng was knocked to the ground by a punch. Li Hung was stunned, he was stunned, looked at Lin Feng who was lying on the ground, covering his face and crying in pain. He was a little confused. He was clearly going to hit Chen Tao just now, how come in the blink of an eye, it was Lin Feng who was hit? Li Hung hurried over and supported Lin Feng. Lin Feng kicked Li Hung away and said fiercely, "Get out. I don't need your help, you are a traitor. I asked you to hit him, but you hit me." Li Hung was stunned. He hurriedly said, "Boss, I didn't mean to hit you. I don't know what happened just now." "Get out." Lin Feng didn't listen at all. After cursing, he struggled to get up, pulled out a pistol from his waist, and pointed the gun at Chen Tao. "You bastard, you actually embarrassed me here, I want you to die." As he said, he put his hand on the ring of the pistol. "Lin Feng! Stop it!" Suddenly, a roar sounded. Hearing this voice, Lin Feng paused, frowned, and looked at the person who came. At a glance, Lin Feng was slightly startled. "Second uncle." Chen Tao also looked over, and at a glance, Chen Tao found that the person who came was actually an acquaintance. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 73. The person rushing towards this direction was Lin Tang, who had met Chen Tao once. The guy who calls himself the second in command of Tear Company. When Lin Feng saw Lin Tang coming over, he was slightly startled. "Second uncle." Lin Tang stretched out his big hand, snatched the pistol from Lin Feng's hand, and slapped Lin Feng in the face. Crack! Lin Feng's face turned to one side, and there was a bright red slap mark on his cheek. He was stunned. He raised his face and looked at Lin Tang. "Second uncle, you." Lin Tang frowned and said, "Shut up." Lin Tang looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry, my nephew is blind. You must not get angry with the child." "I'm sorry." Lin Tang looked at Lin Feng, who looked astonished. He stretched out his big hand and held Lin Feng's head. "Why don't you apologize to me quickly?" With a press of his hand, Lin Feng bent down towards Chen Tao. Lin Feng was a little confused, but he still said honestly, "I'm sorry." Chen Tao looked at Lin Tang. Just now Lin Tang called him Mr. Chen. In other words, was he recognized? Chen Tao touched the mask on his face with his hand. The mask should be fine, and no one around him recognized him. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Ziyi Qing's face. Once he saw it, Chen Tao understood. After all, Lin Tang is the second in command of Tear Company. As a large company, he can certainly get more information about Chen Tao. Ziyi Qing is Chen Tao's lover, and they should also know this. It was probably because of Ziyi Qing that Lin Tang recognized her. Lin Tang appeared relatively timely. If Lin Tang appeared a step later and waited for Lin Feng to shoot, Lin Feng's life would have been left here. Of course, to be honest, Chen Tao didn't want to see that scene. After all, he was on a date with Ziyi Qing. If he saw blood, he would be in a bad mood. Chen Tao said, "Go away, don't disturb our meal." Lin Tang quickly said, okay. He suddenly pulled Lin Feng's hand and pulled Lin Feng towards the front desk. Chen Tao watched Lin Tang settle the bill with the front desk, and left the restaurant with Lin Feng. Seeing this, Chen Tao withdrew his gaze. Gentlemen. The waitress pushing the dining cart came over. She called Chen Tao. Chen Tao came to his senses and looked at the waitress. The waitress moved the dishes from the dining cart to the dining table. Chen Tao calmed down when he saw the delicious food being served. Second uncle, who was that guy just now? Lin Feng and Lin Tang had just left the house. Lin Feng asked Lin Tang in confusion, second uncle, you are so afraid of him. What's going on? Lin Tang glared at Lin Feng, you have been eating, drinking, and having fun outside all day long, and you don't even know him. He is now a celebrity in our Tal district. Did you read yesterday's news? Lin Feng is not stupid. When he heard this, his expression changed. You mean, he is the guy who bombed the Heaven Punishment Alliance with fighter jets? Lin Tang nodded slightly and said, according to the information we got, his body seems to be an artificial one. Bullets cannot penetrate and explosions cannot kill him. Your kid pointed a gun at him. If I hadn't arrived in time, I would tell you, your head is no longer in your neck. Lin Tang said solemnly, if he is really angry and he sends fighter jets to bomb our company headquarters just like he bombed the Heavenly Punishment Alliance, what do you think the consequences will be? He patted Lin Feng on the head and said, how stupid. Lin Feng covered the back of his head and said, it hurts, second uncle, how did you recognize him? He is wearing a mask. So I said you are eating, drinking, and having fun outside and don't understand anything. He is wearing a mask, but the woman beside him is Zi Cheng. Chen Tao and Zi Cheng appeared once before at the Tal auction house. Seeing Zi Cheng here, the one wearing the mask must be him. Lin Tang stared at Lin Feng and said, seeing Zi Cheng here, you dare to challenge the masked person, you are really brave. Hearing this, Lin Feng realized that he had wandered around the gate of hell, and his face turned pale. Thank you, uncle, for saving my life. If you see him in the future, stay away and don't seek death, Lin Tang said. Okay, okay. Cold sweat broke out on Lin Feng's forehead. Lin Feng watched Lin Tang get into the car and leave. Lin Feng subconsciously looked back at the Western restaurant behind him. He pinched his tie, pulled it apart a little, and took a breath. I almost died, but I didn't know it yet. It's really terrible. Chen Tao didn't know much about Lin Feng's affairs, and he wasn't interested in knowing too much. After all, to Chen Tao, Lin Feng is just a fly. If the fly is driven away, then who will care about what the fly will do next? Chen Tao cut a piece of beef and put it into his mouth. His eyes looked at Zi Cheng in front of him. Zi Cheng was also looking at him, and their eyes met. Zi Cheng's face turned slightly red, but she didn't move her eyes and looked at Chen Tao. Without the torment of illness, Zi Cheng has a hint of confidence in her brows, which gives her a different kind of charm. Seeing Zi Cheng in such high spirits, Chen Tao was in a good mood. He smiled and said, eat, we will go to the park for a walk later. Zi Cheng nodded slightly and said, yeah. The two enjoyed today's dinner slowly. Even though it was dinner, it wasn't dark yet. It's evening time now. The sky in the west is red, the color of the sun's afterglow. After dinner, Chen Tao and Zi Cheng took a walk in the park. At this time, it was almost time to get off work. There was a constant flow of cars, but the park was particularly quiet. Chen Tao looked at Ziking beside him. Ziking's white suspender shirt, paired with tight jeans, perfectly outlined her perfect figure. She was so beautiful. Chen Tao stretched out his hand and put his arm around Ziking's waist. Ziking was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao, with a hint of joy in her eyes. She subconsciously moved closer to Chen Tao, and her little head rested on Chen Tao's shoulder, looking very well behaved. Ding dong. Suddenly, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's head. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched. Master, I'm no one. Chen Tao said, number one? What's the matter? Ziking, who was next to him, heard Chen Tao's voice. She raised her head and looked at Chen Tao. Not long ago, number one followed Wu Yao to the Wu family. At this time, I don't know if number one has returned home. What's the matter with looking for me now? Master, Wu Yao's father said he wants to tear me apart. Can you allow it? No one's voice came. This content made Chen Tao frown. Chen Tao said, no, you are my thing, no one can tear you apart. Okay, master. No one's voice slowly stopped. After hanging up the call, Chen Tao frowned suddenly. What does it mean? Tear up number one? He asked number one to follow Wu Yao, but Chen Tao didn't expect that Wu Yao's father would actually want to do that. Chen Tao was a little annoyed. He took out his mobile phone from his pocket and dialed Wu Yao's mobile phone number. If the people of the Wu family dared to force number one, even if Wu Yao was there, Chen Tao would not be able to forgive the Wu family. This matter must be made clear. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wu Nian. Chapter 74. Hello, Wu Yao, Chen Tao said. Wu Yao hummed and said, well, dear, why did you take the initiative to call me? Seeing that it was Chen Tao who took the initiative to call her, she seemed a little happy. Honey. Chen Tao ignored the title for the time being and said, number one said that your father plans to dismantle no one. There is no such thing, Wu Yao said. When my dad saw number one, he did say that he would dismantle number one, but that was just a joke. I guess number one misunderstood. Wu Yao said, my grandfather was a scientist and liked to study high-tech things. He wanted to make an artificial human his whole life, but he just couldn't. He passed away. My dad is also a scientist, but he prefers to do business. But my grandfather's dream has always been a worry in my family. You don't know how happy my dad was when he saw number one. That's an artificial man, and that was my grandfather's wish. Many people said that artificial man was impossible to realize. My grandfather said at that time that it could be realized, but he was always denied by the world. When he was dying, he didn't close your eyes. And this number one is something you lent me, my dear. Even if I die, I won't let my family dismantle it. No, number one is a high-tech intelligence, there is no way she could misunderstand. There is only one possibility why number one asked Chen Tao that way, and that is, Wu Yao's father really wanted to take number one apart. Of course, I just thought about it and didn't take any action. Human beings always have many thoughts. When they see a beautiful woman, they want to have it, but that doesn't mean they will actually do it. Thinking about it doesn't make it a reality. But as a robot, number one didn't think so much, so he came to ask Chen Tao. Chen Tao slowly calmed down. As a scientist in a family that studies artificial humans, Wu Yao's father would have such thoughts, which is probably the nature of a scientist. From this perspective, it was indeed Chen Tao who misunderstood. Chen Tao said, sorry, I misunderstood you. It's okay. Wu Yao's voice was relaxed. She said, there are always a lot of misunderstandings between people. It's just that you are my beloved man, so I hope you can trust me more. Chen Tao was silent. Obviously, this topic was not something Chen Tao could handle. He said, that's it for now. Let number one stay at your place for a while. I'll let her come back by herself tomorrow. Wu Yao responded. Chen Tao hung up the phone. He said, number one, can you hear me? Master, I'm here. The voice of number one came. Chen Tao said, you stay at Wu's house for one night and come back tomorrow. Remember, your body is a high-level secret and no unauthorized disassembly and research is allowed. Okay. Every part of no one's body exceeds the technology that this world should have. If it is used for research, it may be possible to obtain a lot of technologies that are superior to this era. But the problem is that Chen Tao does not intend to share the technology. Especially the Wu family. Although Wu Yao and Chen Tao have an ambiguous relationship, the Wu family still supports the existence of the Heavenly Punishment Alliance. If the Wu family assists the Heavenly Punishment Alliance in acquiring technology, this is not what Chen Tao wants to see. After giving this order to number 1, Chen Tao felt relieved. With no one's ability, as long as number 1 does not actively cooperate, no one can go beyond no one's will and forcibly dismantle and study no one's body. That's it? Dear, a voice came from beside me. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Zi Ching beside him. Zi Ching looked at Chen Tao worriedly and said, "Are you okay?" Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "As long as your husband is here, of course everything will be fine." Zi Ching's face turned slightly red, and she looked at Chen Tao. "Don't make trouble, we are not married yet." Chen Tao put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Don't worry about formal matters. From my point of view, we are already here." Zi Ching's face turned redder, and her little head slowly rested on Chen Tao's shoulder. Her delicate face was filled with happiness and joy. Chen Tao stroked her hair and continued walking in the park with her. It's getting late. Dark night enveloped the entire park. Too dark. Zi Ching suggested going home. Chen Tao didn't refuse either. The two returned to the villa. Owner. Number 5 stood in front of the door and looked at Chen Tao. She came over to greet him, looked at Chen Tao respectfully, and said, "Master, there is a person outside who calls himself the Black Swan Organization and says he wants to see you." Chen Tao's heart skipped a beat. Black Swan? His eyebrows wrinkled slightly. The Black Swan people are here? Come to hunt him down? Chen Tao slowly suppressed a different emotion in his heart, which was an uneasy emotion. As a slum dweller, Chen Tao has lived under the management of Black Swan for a long time. He has a natural fear of black swans. But now Chen Tao has understood part of Nebula's power, and for him, the black swan no longer needs to be feared. There are conflicting emotions. Chen Tao adjusted his mood and said, "Where are the people?" Number 5 said, "Waiting outside the gate. I have been waiting for more than 3 hours. It's been more than 3 hours, I'm quite patient." Chen Tao said, "Check to see if there is anything dangerous. Collect pistols and other items before bringing them in." Okay. Number 5 nodded slightly. Chen Tao walked into the villa and sat down on the sofa. "Old husband." Chen Tao was slightly startled, and he turned his head to look at his side. Ziking's face flushed slightly, and she stood there nervously. She said, "Should I get out of the way?" Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Well, you go to the house and wait for a while." Well, Ziking turned and walked towards the stairs. That husband just now was quite nice. Ziking paused, she felt her face getting hot, and hurried upstairs. Seeing Ziking somewhat escaping back, Chen Tao smiled. He felt much more relaxed. He looked ahead, his expression recovered, and he calmed down. So, the people from the Black Swan sneaked into the Tal district and came to find him. What was the reason? It was fine that the people from the Heaven Punishment Alliance came to find him before, but now the people from the Black Swan also came, which was beyond Chen Tao's expectation. At this time, there was a knock at the door. "Knock, knock." "Master, I'm number 5, I brought someone." Chen Tao said, "Come in." The door opened. Number 5 walked in from outside, and there were 2 people behind number 5. When Chen Tao saw it, his eyebrows relaxed. Acquaintances. The people who came were 2 women. Chen Tao had actually seen both of these women. One was Lin Na, the commander of the Black Swan, and the other was Qin Xiaoyan. Of course, Chen Tao didn't know the names of the 2 girls. but Chen Tao knew their faces. The more impressive ones. Both women wore the same black uniform, but the difference was Lin Na had long hair, while Qin Xiaoyan had a short haircut. Lin Na looked at Chen Tao, expressionless as before, looking quite serious. "Mr. Chen, we meet again." Hearing this, Chen Tao crossed his arms across his chest, looked at Lin Na and said, "The shoulder has recovered well." Lin Na frowned and held the shoulder that Chen Tao had shot through with his gun before. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 75. Lin Na slowly loosened her hand. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Black Swan soldiers, don't mention the past." She glanced at the sofa, then looked at Chen Tao, "Can I sit?" Chen Tao folded his hands on his chest, looked at Lin Na and said, "Everyone who comes is a guest, take a seat." Number 5 on the side pulled down the sofa and moved the sofa next to Chen Tao. Lin Na was sitting on the sofa, and Qin Xiaoyan was standing astride Lin Na. Lin Na looked at Chen Tao and said, "If my guess is correct, you should already know that our Black Swan is coming to attack the Tal district." Chen Tao looked at Lin Na and said, "People from the Heavenly Punishment Alliance have been here before. They mentioned this matter." Lin Na nodded slightly, she didn't seem surprised. Lin Na said, "The purpose of my coming here is similar to that of the Heavenly Punishment Alliance. I want to get your help." Chen Tao looked at Lin Na. Lin Na said, "You have 2 fighter jets and have technology that surpasses the defense system of the Heavenly Punishment Alliance. In our opinion, if you can join our Black Swan, it will be of great help to our crusade this time. If you agree to help us, then we can forget about the crimes you have committed on our side. We can even make you a hero of our Black Swan and reward you." Lin Na looked at Chen Tao and said, "This way, you don't have to stay in the city full of crime." As expected of the people from Black Swan, they are somewhat similar to the people from the Heavenly Punishment Alliance. As soon as it comes, the theme is stated directly without being verbose at all. Frankly speaking, Chen Tao was more tempted by the conditions proposed by Black Swan than by the Heavenly Punishment Alliance. After all, in this world, the Heavenly Punishment Alliance in the Tal district is just a military alliance organized by a group of fugitives, and Black Swan is the real dominant organization in this world. But, do we really want to do something for the Black Swan? Chen Tao looked at Black Swan and said, "Frankly speaking, I am very moved by your proposal." Lin Na's eyes lit up slightly, and she said, "Then, if Black Swan hadn't given such a bad impression, maybe I would have agreed," Chen Tao said lightly. Lin Na frowned. Chen Tao said, "At the beginning, your fighter jets and a missile directly destroyed the suspension bridge, and thousands of people died as a result, but you Black Swan had a piece of news that directly put everyone's lives on my head." Lin Na's eyes glowed, and she said, "It is true that we did not handle this matter carefully, but if you hadn't tried to escape at the beginning, the suspension bridge would not have." "Ha." Chen Tao couldn't help laughing. Chen Tao looked at Lin Na and said, "You mean, either I will be imprisoned by you, or I will just stay still and let the missiles hit me directly?" Lin Na frowned. Chen Tao continued, "If I didn't have an invulnerable body at that time, I probably wouldn't be alive to talk to you now. You think you treat me like that, and now you throw a piece of bread over and I have to eat it obediently." Chen Tao looked at Lin Na and said, "What do you Black Swans think of me? A dog?" Lin Na frowned tightly and said, "Do you plan to cooperate with the Heavenly Punishment Alliance?" Chen Tao looked at Lin Na and said, "Who I cooperate with is my own business. You just need to take care of yourselves. Do you really plan to stay in the Tal district for the rest of your life? This place is full of evil criminals and is the most chaotic area in the world." Lin Na said, "I know you have a beloved woman. Do you really plan to stay in this area, let your beloved woman live in this place? I know whether there is chaos here or not. Whether I want to stay in the Tal district for the rest of my life is not something Black Swan has to worry about. You. Lin Na's breath caught, she bit her lower lip and looked at Chen Tao. She has a headache. Among them, Black Swan's fighters, bombers, and soldiers are all ready. But the Black Swans did not dare to attack because they had a concern. Although the Heavenly Punishment Alliance has suffered heavy losses, it is not just the Heavenly Punishment Alliance that can challenge Black Swan in the Tal district. The powerful military power displayed by Chen Tao is enough for Black Swan to take it seriously. It can ignore the highest defense system of the Heaven Punishment Alliance and directly bomb the headquarters of the Heaven Punishment Alliance. Even Black Swan's most advanced fighter cannot do this kind of behavior. If Chen Tao aims his firepower at Black Swan, even Black Swan may not be able to withstand it. Therefore, before the attack, Black Swan's high command had already issued an order to deal with Chen Tao first. And Lin Na is the executor of this mission. Only by convincing Chen Tao can Black Swan attack with confidence. But after hearing Chen Tao's unrelenting development, Lin Na felt that it was a bit difficult this time. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Mr. Chen, let's each take a step back. As long as you don't interfere in this war, I can also give you what I just said. We will treat your previous matters, let bygones be bygones. Don't you want to interfere?" The problem is that Chen Tao had no intention of interfering in the first place. Chen Tao looked at Lin Na and said, "I don't have to interfere." Lin Na's eyes lit up slightly, she pursed her thin lips and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, "However, I also have exceptions." Lin Na was startled and looked at Chen Tao. "What exception?" Chen Tao said, "I will not interfere, but if your war burns down my residence and damages my things, then I will not hold back." Lin Na nodded slightly. "Don't worry, you won't interfere. We will assume that you are from our side, and we have written off all the things you committed before. In our Black Swan archives, you are the innocent person. At the same time, you are still the hero of my Black Swan. We will not come close to your residence." Chen Tao said, "Okay." Lin Na's eyes lit up. She stood up and stretched out her hand to Chen Tao. "A pleasure to work with." Chen Tao stood up and shook hands with Lin Na. The two let go of their hands. Lin Na turned and left. Chen Tao said, "Number 5, give it away." On the 5th, he left with Lin Na and Qin Xiaoyan. Chen Tao sat back on the sofa and remained silent for a while. As expected of you, a voice came from beside him. Chen Tao raised his face and saw He Yuxuan and Ziyi Qing walking down the stairs. He Yuxuan was the one who spoke. He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao with a smile on his face and said, "You didn't intend to interfere with their affairs in the first place. Now, a few words can bring so many benefits." He Yuxuan sat next to Chen Tao, crossing her legs and looking at Chen Tao with big eyes. Seeing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. "It's just, old, dear, Black Swan, will you regret it?" Ziyi Qing sat next to Chen Tao. She looked at Chen Tao with a hint of worry in her eyes. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 76. It is still difficult for Ziyi Qing to call her husband naturally, but it is still natural to call Chen Tao dear. Hearing Ziyi Qing's worry, Chen Tao raised his hand and stroked Ziyi Qing's hair. He said, "It's not that we have to worry about Black Swan repenting, but Black Swan has to worry that we repent." Ziyi Qing was slightly startled and looked at Chen Tao. He Yuxuan smiled and said, "Tao is right. Now we have taken the initiative, and Black Swan is the passive party. Black Swan is obviously afraid of us. They should be worried about whether Chen Tao will go back on his word now, not us. To worry about them. Because He Yuxuan looked at Zicheng and said with a smile, "It is they who need us now, not us who need them." Zicheng's eyes brightened slightly. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Is that so?" Chen Tao said, "Absolutely." Chen Tao didn't think too much. He didn't plan to go back to the slums now, let alone the rich area. For Chen Tao, he is not afraid of Black Swan going back on his word. As for the other things, Chen Tao didn't think much about it. He didn't think about it as much as He Yuxuan. However, what He Yuxuan said does make sense. "Dear, I think you can help a bunch of Heavenly Punishment Alliance." He Yuxuan came close to Chen Tao, leaning on Chen Tao's shoulder, and looked at Chen Tao with her eyes. Chen Tao looked at He Yuxuan and said, "Are you planning to make me break my promise?" He Yuxuan pursed her thin lips, smiled, and said, "You just promised them not to interfere in the war between them, but you didn't say you can't share the technology with others. You can sell the technology to me, and then I can resell it." Sold to the Heavenly Punishment Alliance. He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao and said, "I think it is in my interest to maintain a balance now. If Black Swan wins, without the restrictions of the Heavenly Punishment Alliance, Black Swan will definitely take action against my dear honey." Chen Tao ignored He Yuxuan's quietly changed title and thought for a moment. What He Yuxuan said was indeed correct. If the Black Swan wins this war, the Black Swan will annex the Dhar district, which will bring chaos to the Dhar district. This is not what Chen Tao wants to see. "My dear, I think you can create an army of 20 more cyborgs. But when the Heavenly Punishment Alliance cannot handle it, you can lend the cyborg army to the Heavenly Punishment Alliance." Chen Tao said, "Well, I will consider your opinion." He Yuxuan smiled, looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, and said, "Does this count as helping you? Can you give me a reward?" She slowly moved her face towards Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked away, stood up, and said, "I'm going to get some air." With that said, he walked out. He Yuxuan was startled and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao left the villa and took a walk in the spacious manor. He came to the moon lake. It is now night, and the moonlight is shining on the water of Zaio Lake, and the lake water is rippling with a silver luster. Looking at the clear moon lake in front of him, his irritable mood gradually calmed down. Chen Tao is just an ordinary person. He uses an ordinary person's brain to deal with these things. For him, the pressure is a bit too much. He doesn't know what to do is right or wrong. "Xingyun, tell me, what should I do rightly?" Chen Tao asked. A mechanical voice came, "Nebula cannot understand this question and cannot get the answer." Does such a highly intelligent being have no answer? Chen Tao was silent. Husband, suddenly, Chen Tao heard a voice coming from behind him. He looked back and saw Zicheng standing there at some unknown moment, looking at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, "Why are you here?" Zicheng pursed her thin lips and said, "Are you worried?" Chen Tao turned slightly sideways and looked at Yuehu. Chen Tao felt his waist tighten slightly, and the beauty behind him leaned over. Chen Tao could smell the fragrance of the girl behind him. "Actually, I don't understand these things, but I don't want to see you being careless. If you frown, it makes me uncomfortable," Zicheng said softly. "I just want to make you happy. I also want to help you, but I really don't know how to help." Hearing this, Chen Tao felt warm in his heart. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt his eyes light up slightly. "Right? Why did I forget? My original purpose was for the safety of me and Zicheng, nothing more. But now I think about it more and more. As long as I am safe and Zicheng is safe, then everything will be fine. Since this is the case, why do we need to think too much? What does other people's affairs have to do with me? Whether it is right or wrong, what does it have to do with me? As long as she and I were safe, nothing else mattered." Suddenly, Chen Tao felt that all the haze in front of his eyes disappeared. Chen Tao felt his eyes light up slightly. He smiled and turned to look at Zicheng. He leaned down and kissed Zicheng. Parted lips. Chen Tao looked at Zicheng, who looked confused. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Thanks to you, I figured it out." There was a smile on Zicheng's face. "Seeing your smile makes me feel relieved." Chen Tao nodded slightly. "Just be safe first. 30 maids with micronuclear bombs are not enough. That's not a fighting type." Chen Tao said to Nebula, "Nebula, I need 100 combat-type androids to guard Yuehu Manor. Remember to number them. Receive instructions and start writing." Preparing. A blue light lit up in front of Chen Tao. One after another, the androids appeared in front of Chen Tao. Not long after, 100 fully armed androids wearing silver armor, holding guns and helmets appeared in front of Chen Tao. 100 androids stood in a row in front of Chen Tao. These androids looked exactly the same in appearance, except for the numbers on their chests. The first number was number 31. There were a total of 100 people, and the highest was number 131. Chen Tao said, "From today on, all of you will guard the safety of Yuehu Manor." "Yes." 100 androids made a sound at the same time. The sound was similar to the electronic music coming from the speaker. "The question is." Female voice? Chen Tao was slightly startled. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He looked at number 31 and said, "Can your helmet be opened?" Yes, it was a female voice. Chen Tao said, "Open the helmet." The helmet was opened. The appearance in front of him made Chen Tao blink his eyes. After the helmet was untied, Chen Tao saw a beautiful face. Wu Yao. It was Wu Yao's face again. Chen Tao subconsciously rubbed his temple. It seemed that Nebula had defaulted to using Wu Yao's body data for the androids. But this meant there were 130 Wu Yao androids, which was a bit scary. Forget it. Anyway, these combat robots all wore helmets and armor. Chen Tao said, "Take it back." Watching number 31 take the helmet back, Chen Tao said, "Disperse, go to your own posts, and maintain the safety of Yuehu Manor." "Yes." After responding in unison, the 100 combat androids dispersed in an orderly manner. "The combatants have been distributed, so what's next?" Chen Tao looked at the 2D6 unmanned fighters parked in the manor. "How about turning this Yuehu Manor into a military base? My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 77. Yuehu Manor is indeed not small, and a small military base can indeed be built here. And in this case, the scenery of Yuehu Manor is estimated to no longer exist. Chen Tao said, "Xingyun, I want to build a small military base. Is there any way?" "Master, many years ago, technological wars were no longer carried out on land, and we will not build military bases on the ground." Xingyun's mechanical voice came. "If the master wants a military base, Xingyun suggests making a base warship that can be suspended in the air as a military base. If attacked, you can choose to take off into outer space to avoid some enemy attacks." "Base warship?" Chen Tao said, "Then build a military base for me according to the way the military base in your database is built." Received the order, start writing the program. Writing. Chen Tao saw a sky full of blue light spots, covering the top. Just like blue stars, suspended in the night sky. These blue light spots are located very high, thousands of meters above the ground. The blue light spots are swimming wildly around a specific route. It can be seen that as the blue light spots move, a little bit of new material appears in the air. Chen Tao knew that the nebula had begun to compile the base warship. But looking at the range covered by the blue light spots, at the speed at which this material appears, it is estimated that this military base cannot be compiled immediately in a short time. "What is that?" A voice came from the side. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Ziking. Ziking opened her eyes wide and looked up. Her eyes were full of doubt. Hearing this, Chen Tao raised his hand, stroked Ziking's hair, and said, "A military base is being built there to protect your safety and mine." Ziking still didn't understand. Military base. Chen Tao smiled, "Go home, let's sleep, you will know tomorrow morning." Ziking pursed her thin lips and nodded slightly. Chen Tao hugged Ziking's shoulders and accompanied her back to the villa. Tonight's Tal district. It became lively again. The economic situation of Tal district is similar to that of the rich district. The night sky of the whole place is bright because of the lights in the city, so usually you can't see the stars. The only thing you can see is the moonlight. But tonight, as long as people look up, they will see a strange scene. Little by little, the blue light is densely distributed in the night sky like stars. The blue light dots are circling, outlining strange patterns. Look, what is that? It looks like a blue star, but not quite, and that thing will move, as if outlining something. It's so strange, it looks like a giant three-dimensional battleship. It feels so big. People who are closer to Yuehu Manor have a deeper feeling. There seems to be something in the blue light, and it seems that something has come out. That is, what is that? Is it a ship? It's too big. People who are closer to Yuehu Manor have already seen part of the body of the base battleship. Just a part of it feels like it is covering the sky and the sun. The whole Tal district began to discuss the blue light. It was very lively. The next morning, Chen Tao woke up from his sleep and slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, Chen Tao found that there was no one around him. The bed was empty except for himself. Chen Tao got up and looked around. At a glance, Chen Tao found a beautiful figure on the balcony. Seeing the beautiful figure, Chen Tao smiled. He got up and walked over. Ziking was wearing a thin shirt, standing in front of the balcony, looking up. Chen Tao walked over, put his arm around Ziking's waist, and held her in his arms. He kissed Ziking's cheek and said with a smile, "What are you looking at?" Ziking blushed and smiled. She raised her face and looked up. Chen Tao looked in the direction Ziking was looking. At a glance, Chen Tao's eyes condensed slightly. Right above, a huge monster seemed to cover the entire sky. Covering the sun and clouds, it flew very high, but the shadow it cast was enough to cover the entire Yuehu Manor. This looks like a huge battleship, but unlike other battleships, this one is flying in the air. Very huge, terrifying. This battleship has already flown very high, but its shadow is so huge. If it flies underground, it is so huge that it can probably cover a city. Chen Tao was shocked. Is this the base battleship that Xingyun mentioned? This is too big, right? This thing is so huge that it can probably accommodate half of the people in the Tal district. It's amazing. That, is it the military base you mentioned? Ziking's voice came. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Ziking. Their eyes met. Chen Tao said, "Yeah." Ziqing pursed her lips and said, "It feels big." Chen Tao smiled and said, "It's a little big, do you want to go up and take a look?" Ziqing's eyes were shining, she nodded slightly and said, "Yeah." Chen Tao looked at Ziqing's mature figure and smiled and said, "Change clothes." Ziqing blushed slightly, "Yeah." Of course she had to change, it would be difficult for her to go out like this. Change clothes. The two of them went out. Left the villa. Outside the door, He Yuxuan was standing outside, looking up with big eyes. He Yuxuan's face was a little ugly, she hurriedly looked at Chen Tao and said, "What is that?" "Aliens." She seemed a little nervous. Probably scared. Chen Tao smiled and said, "No, that's the base battleship I built." He Yuxuan's face was full of shock, "You built it? This is impossible." A man frowned and walked over here. He looked at the battleship in the sky and said, the technology of this thing is at least thousands of years ahead of our current technology. With the current technology of the Earth, whether it is the most advanced Black Swan or the Heaven Punishment Alliance, it is impossible to make such a thing. The man looked at Chen Tao and said, "How can you make it? Who is this man? Why is he in Chen Tao's Yuehu manner?" Chen Tao looked at the man. "Tao, he is my father," Wu Tianjing Wu Yao said aloud. Hearing this, Chen Tao understood. It was Wu Yao who brought Wu Tianjing here. No wonder. Wu Yao is Chen Tao's friend, so the servants certainly won't stop him. Wu Yao looked at Wu Tianjing and said, "Dad, he is Chen Tao." Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao and said, "I know, but I still can't believe that this giant battleship was built by him. The maker of this battleship is Xingyun, but Xingyun can only be said to be a celestial computer, so as a computer operator, Chen Tao, is he the one who built this battleship?" Of course, even if Chen Tao said that he built it, Wu Tianjing probably wouldn't believe it. Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing and said, "Believe it or not, I don't need to make you believe it." Wu Tianjing frowned. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 78. Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao, his eyebrows slightly relaxed, and he said, "Friend, I don't mean to offend you. Although I am a businessman now, I used to do research and can be regarded as half a scientist. I still have some research on technology." He looked at the battleship flying in the air and said, "The hugeness of this battleship is breathtaking. Its material and the energy it uses to fly are all a mystery to current science." Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao apologetically and said, "If this battleship is really built by you, I am willing to apologize for my doubts about you." Chen Tao glanced at Wu Tianjing and retracted his gaze. He noticed that number one was standing next to him. Meeting Chen Tao's gaze, number one said, "Master." Chen Tao nodded slightly. He looked at Ziking in his arms and said, "Let's go up." Ziking hummed when she heard it. "Go up?" Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao. "What does it mean?" A door appeared in front of Chen Tao out of thin air. The door stood in front of Chen Tao, and it was pitch black. If Chen Tao knew nothing, he would not dare to go in when he saw the black door that appeared out of thin air. But through the information given to Chen Tao by Xingyun, Chen Tao knew what this door was. According to Xingyun, this door is connected to a micro wormhole. The micro wormhole is connected to another wormhole located in the base battleship. As long as you step into this micro wormhole, you can reach the inside of the base battleship. "What is this door?" Wu Tianjing couldn't help asking. Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "Micro wormhole." Wu Tianjing was stunned, frowned, and said, "What do you want to do?" Chen Tao said, "This micro wormhole is connected to the micro wormhole on the battleship. As long as you enter it, you can reach the base battleship." "This is impossible," Wu Tianjing frowned and said, "Wormholes have indeed been studied by great scientists. It is said that they can indeed be displaced, but the matter that can be integrated into the wormhole is extremely small. If a human body steps into it, it will be directly rolled into pieces by the wormhole. If this is a wormhole, then you will definitely die if you enter, let alone displace to other places." Chen Tao glanced at Wu Tianjing and said lightly, "This micro wormhole has been programmed by me. As long as a person approaches, the program will automatically decompose the human body into molecular size. After being transported through the micro wormhole, it will be assembled outside the micro wormhole on the other side." "Are you crazy?" Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao's current identity is special. In this Tal district, no, or it should be in this world, the most powerful Black Swan and Heavenly Punishment Alliance dare not provoke Chen Tao. Who dares to say that Chen Tao is crazy? But Wu Tianjing dared to do so, and he almost blurted it out. As a rigorous scientist, or should we call him a former scientist, Wu Tianjing could not accept Chen Tao's statement at all. His scientific concept was impacted, and he almost got excited and almost ignored other things, and said it directly. Break the body into molecules through a program. Can it be assembled? Do you think the human body is a computer program? Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao and said, are you kidding? Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing indifferently. Through Chen Tao's eyes, Wu Tianjing found that Chen Tao was not kidding. Wu Tianjing was stunned, his face was full of disbelief, he shook his head and said, impossible, this is absolutely impossible. It's hard to accept, this is too hard to accept. The body is decomposed into molecules, isn't it dead? How can it be decomposed into molecules? Wu Tianjing was a little unbelievable, and he was still muttering to himself. Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing, who was full of disbelief. Don't believe it, frankly speaking, if Chen Tao were in the past, he wouldn't believe it either. Decomposing the body into molecules and then reassembling them is simply a fantasy. However, Chen Tao has seen the power of nebula. Nebula is not a technological existence of this era. Although he doesn't know where nebula comes from, the technological level of the era in which nebula is located is unimaginable. Since nebula said it is possible, it must be possible. Nebula can't lie to Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, believe it or not, you will know when you see it. Chen Tao looked at Ziking and said, can you go in with me? Ziking was slightly startled, and her eyes were shining. Don't, you are looking for death. Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao and said, this is impossible to do, this is too crazy. Entering this micro wormhole, the human body will be torn apart and die directly. It is impossible to survive, impossible to survive. He repeated impossible to survive twice, which shows how sure he is. Wu Tianjing looked at Ziking and said, Miss, I advise you not to listen to him. Ziking looked at Wu Tianjing, then at Chen Tao. She smiled and said, my life was given by Chen Tao. If there is anyone in this world who would deceive me, it would not be Chen Tao. Chen Tao is everything to me, and I trust him more than myself. Wu Tianjing was stunned. Chen Tao looked at Ziking and smiled. Chen Tao looked at the dark door and stepped into it. Chen Tao only felt a black and a bright light in front of his eyes. Everything around him changed. Chen Tao found that he was surrounded by metal walls. It was very spacious, as big as a basketball court. There was a huge windshield in front of him. Through the huge glass, he could see the blue sky and white clouds outside. Welcome to the base, Master. A mechanical voice came. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, do you have a name? The base warship said, no. Chen Tao said, then I will give you a name and call you base number 1. How about that? Base 1, said, okay. Dear, a voice came from beside me. Chen Tao turned his face and saw Ziqing standing behind him. Behind Ziqing is the black door. To be precise, it should be called a micro wormhole. Ziqing looked at Chen Tao, then looked around. Where is this? Chen Tao smiled and said, in base no 1. Ziqing looked around and said, it feels so big. She looked at the giant windshield-like glass in front of her and said, is this, in the operation room of that battleship? Ziqing looked around, but she didn't see any operating tools. Dear, where are the operating tools? Ziqing looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said with a smile, base number 1 is very large and cannot be operated manually. The entire base number 1 is currently in fully intelligent mode. If we want to talk about operating tools, then I am the operating tool. Before Chen Tao could say anything, there was another movement on the other side of the miniature wormhole. Chen Tao took a look. A beautiful figure walked out of the miniature wormhole. Chen Tao took a closer look and found that it was He Yuxuan. He Yuxuan smiled, looked at Chen Tao, and said, I knew it. I believe you are right. Chen Tao was slightly startled. Ziqing would come in with Chen Tao, which Chen Tao could understand, but He Yuxuan also came in, which made Chen Tao a little surprised. Does he Yuxuan already trust Chen Tao to this extent? Can you even leave your life to Chen Tao? At this time, there was movement in the micro wormhole again. The movement this time made Chen Tao raise his eyebrows slightly. This time he couldn't help but be a little surprised. When Zicheng came in, Chen Tao could understand it, but when he Yuxuan came in, Chen Tao was a little surprised. So who's coming in now? A beautiful figure appeared. It was Wu Yao. After Wu Yao came over, her eyes were filled with confusion, and then she looked at Chen Tao. Her eyes lit up slightly, and she suddenly pounced on Chen Tao. Chen Tao was slightly startled. The fragrant breeze comes. Wu Yao threw herself into Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao opened his hands subconsciously, letting her lean into his arms. Chen Tao was a little confused. Wu Yao also came in? Does she believe that Chen Tao has reached this point? At this time, Chen Tao saw movement in the miniature wormhole again. Chen Tao was stunned for a moment. Anyone else? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 79. A figure walked out of the wormhole. The person who came out was Wu Yao's father, Wu Tianjing. Wu Tianjing looked back at the disappearing miniature wormhole behind him, then raised his hand and looked at his palm. How is it possible? Wu Tianjing couldn't help but mutter to himself. He raised his face and looked around. Looking at the interior of this spacious battleship, Wu Tianjing was a little in disbelief. Inside the battleship, the operation room alone is the size of a basketball court. Directly in front is a huge window similar to a windshield. Through this glass, you can see the blue sky and white clouds outside. The person who came in turned out to be Wu Tianjing. You came in too, aren't you afraid of death? Chen Tao said. When Wu Tianjing heard this, he came back to his senses and looked at Chen Tao. He was stunned. He bowed to him and said, I apologize for doubting you before. The technology you possess has far surpassed everything I know. Looking at Wu Tianjing's shocked and apologetic look, Chen Tao pondered for a moment and said, okay. He looked at Wu Yao beside him and looked at her. She felt Chen Tao's gaze and looked this way. Their eyes met. Wu Yao pursed her thin lips, her beautiful big eyes filled with obsession and admiration. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze. Now I understand. Unbeknownst to Chen Tao, Wu Yao had already given her heart to Chen Tao. Her trust in Chen Tao has exceeded her own life. Wu Tianjing should have rushed in when he saw Wu Yao coming in, coupled with his persistence in science. It's a bit boring here, let's go to the deck, Chen Tao said. Okay, Zicheng nodded. Chen Tao walked to the middle of the operating cabin, where there was a long iron rod connected to the ceiling directly above. Chen Tao walked to the iron pole and stood, holding the iron pole in his hand. Seeing this, Zicheng also walked over, holding the iron rod in her hand. The other three people also came over. At this time, there was a circular lifting platform on the ground. The lift platform goes up. Wu Yao was wearing high heels. When the lift suddenly went up, she suddenly became unstable and fell down. Fortunately, Chen Tao had quick eyes and quick hands. He stretched out his hand, wrapped his arms around Wu Yao's waist, pulled her back and pulled her into his arms. Wu Yao was slightly startled and looked at Chen Tao. Eyes facing each other. Wu Yao's eyes fell on Chen Tao's face, and she took the initiative to move towards Chen Tao. Kissed. Parted lips. Chen Tao looked at Wu Yao. He looked away and looked at the lifting platform at his feet. The size of this lift platform is 2 meters in radius. This lift platform can accommodate a lot of people. As the lift platform rose, Chen Tao could feel a sense of weightlessness. This should be a sign that the lift platform was too fast. He raised his face and saw that a hole opened in the ceiling above. Everyone was sent up. It didn't take long. Chen Tao felt his eyes light up. Everyone came to the deck of the battleship. This deck is very, very spacious. The spaciousness is shocking. From the deck of this battleship forward, you can barely see the edge. This shows how huge this battleship is. There is no wind, so I won't feel difficulty breathing. Why? A voice came from next to me. Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing beside him. Dad, what are you talking about? Wu Yao asked. Wu Tianjing looked at Wu Yao, then he looked at the blue sky and white clouds above, and said, the higher the altitude, the stronger the wind, the thinner the air, and the colder the temperature. At this height, ordinary people standing here, you will definitely feel the biting wind and have difficulty breathing. If you are a fighter pilot, you must use an oxygen mask when facing this altitude. It is impossible for ordinary people to stand firm at this altitude. Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao. Wu Tianjing's voice also aroused the curiosity of others, who all looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said with a smile, look up and take a look. Wu Tianjing raised his head and took a look. Everything he saw made Wu Tianjing's eyes narrow slightly. Directly above, a huge oval cover enveloped the entire base one. This cover looks like the shape of a bee pupa, made up of transparent hexagrams one after another. What is that? I didn't see that thing just now, Wu Tianjing said. Chen Tao said, that is the protective cover of base number 1. It will protect everything in the battleship and adjust the surrounding environment to a level that allows humans to live normally. Wu Tianjing nodded slightly, so that's it, but, you said, this battleship is a military base. If the protective shield is penetrated and the environmental adjustment function is destroyed, won't the people inside be dead? Chen Tao said, this protective shield is maintained by absorbing star energy. As long as there are stars nearby, it cannot be broken. Of course, if we step back 10,000 steps, even if the protective shield is broken, we can also enter the interior of the battleship. Wu Tianjing's pupils condensed slightly. You mean, as long as the sun is not destroyed, it will not be broken? Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing and said, yes. What if we use a nuclear bomb? Wu Tianjing looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, it is impossible for a nuclear bomb to break through this protective shield. Wu Tianjing took a breath, his eyes were filled with shock, and he looked at Chen Tao in disbelief. This technology is impossible, my friend. Where did you get this kind of technology that far surpasses modern technology? Nuclear bombs are currently the most powerful offensive weapons. A protective shield can even block nuclear bombs, so what else can't it prevent? How did the man in front of me obtain this cutting-edge technology? Wu Tianjing couldn't believe it. Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing and said, secret. Wu Tianjing was slightly startled, then he smiled awkwardly and said, high-end technology should indeed be considered a high-level secret. I was too impatient and made a mistake. Chen Tao nodded slightly. Master, I am number 10. Those two people from the Heavenly Punishment Alliance are here again yesterday. Chen Tao heard the voice of number 10, coming from his mind. Heavenly Punishment Alliance. As expected, Chen Tao made such a big noise here. It would be strange if the Heavenly Punishment Alliance didn't come to take a look at the situation. Chen Tao said, bring them here. Okay, number 10 responded. Chen Tao looked at Wu Tianjing and Wu Yao and said, people from the Heavenly Punishment Alliance are coming. Do you want to hide for a while? Wu Tianjing said, with the current relationship between my daughter and you, I don't think there is any need to hide. Chen Tao was startled and glanced at Wu Yao. Wu Yao's cheeks turned slightly red and she didn't deny it. Chen Tao pondered for a moment and slowly looked away. At this time, a miniature wormhole opened in front of Chen Tao. Number 10 walked out of the micro wormhole. Behind number 10 were the two people Chen Tao had met before, Lan Ruliu and her bodyguard, the big man Zhao Gang. After Lan Rulio came out of the micro wormhole, she looked around. With a hint of luster in her eyes, she slowly looked at Chen Tao and said, "This thing is indeed yours. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 80. Chen Tao looked at Lan Rulio and said, "I came here once yesterday and again today. What is the reason for coming this time?" Lan Rulio said, "We are here to confirm the owner of this spaceship. We also want to know what the owner of this spaceship thinks about the subsequent Black Swan War." Chen Tao looked at Lan Rulio and said, "If you are worried about me joining forces with Black Swan, then just don't worry. I am not interested in war, nor the Heaven Punishment Alliance, nor Black Swan." Lan Rulio was slightly startled. Looking at the man in front of her, she found that his temperament was completely different from yesterday. "What's the difference?" Lan Rulio took a deep look at Chen Tao and said, "You said you would not participate in this war, but you placed this huge spaceship over the Tal district. Can we believe you?" Chen Tao looked at Lan Rulio and said, "Believe me? Do I need you to believe me?" Lan Rulio was startled. Chen Tao looked at Lan Rulio and said, "The technology I have, as long as I am willing, I can destroy the Heavenly Punishment Alliance in a short time. Even if it's Black Swans, I don't take it seriously. Do you think I need you to believe it?" With that said, Chen Tao looked away and waved his hand. Countless blue lights appeared on the deck, fighter jets, bombers, etc. one by one appear on the deck. At a glance, there are hundreds of them. More importantly, these fighters are not D6S or other common fighters. These fighters are full of metal, dark, and full of technology. They don't look like products produced by the technology of this era. A high-tech atmosphere comes oncoming. Chen Tao said, "The fighter plane you are seeing now is called the Z2 fighter. It is loaded with stellar energy and reaches the speed of sound. The power of its attack is comparable to that of a nuclear bomb." He continued, "They are equipped with the most high-tech stealth system and anti-interception system. With your current technology, it is impossible to detect them. By the time you see it with your naked eyes, you are already within their range. There are a total of 100 Z2 fighter jets here. Do you think the military strength of the Heavenly Punishment Alliance alone can withstand several rounds of their bombings?" Lan Rulio's beautiful face turned white for a moment, her eyes trembled slightly, and she looked at Chen Tao. Different from Chen Tao last time, Chen Tao now gave Lan Rulio a strong sense of threat. Yesterday Lan Rulio felt that she could talk to Chen Tao as an equal, but at this moment, Lan Rulio felt that she was nothing in Chen Tao's eyes. Chen Tao looked at number 1 and said, "Number 1, this friend from the Heavenly Punishment Alliance, please perform and show your aerial combat capabilities." Lan Rulio was slightly startled. She looked at the artificial man in front of her who looked exactly like Wu Yao. "Isn't this the maid from Yuehu Manor? This maid also has fighting ability? Are you kidding me?" Number 1 nodded slightly and said, "Okay." The words fell. Under everyone's gaze, number 1 spread out a pair of metal wings and she flew into the sky. Seeing this, Lan Rulio's eyes widened. Wing. Blue light lit up, and a black square substance appeared in the midair. "The matter is suspended in mid-air." "What is that?" Lan Rulio said. Chen Tao said, "Sandbags formed by Z2 material are equivalent to wooden piles in ancient times." Chen Tao said to number 1, "Use all the weapons on your body to attack the Z2 substance." The blue eyes of number 1 turned blue. "Convert to combat mode." Swish, 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 no one's body turned into a machine, and a mini missile launcher appeared on his arm. She aims the missile at Z2 matter. Bang bang bang. The missile hit the Z2 substance. Boom. Fire is flying. 2 machine guns grew out of no one's shoulders, with the muzzles pointed at the Z2 substance and firing wildly. All parts of no one's body have been turned into combat weapons, including guns, missiles, and grenades. Various thermal weapons enveloped the Z2 substance like a violent storm. Fire splattered. The sky was dyed red by the red light produced by the terrifying firepower. Material number 1 and Z2 are already far away from base number 1, but people standing on the deck can still feel the scorching air waves. Chen Tao crossed his chest with his hands and looked at Lan Ruliu beside him. Lan Ruliu's eyes widened and her mouth opened slightly. As the military adjutant of the Heavenly Punishment Alliance, the strongest military organization in the Tal district, Lan Ruliu was very calm from the moment he met Chen Tao. But now faced with such a situation, Lan Ruliu obviously couldn't calm down. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt a light behind him. Immediately afterwards, the invisible protective shield of base number 1 lit up. Boom! There was a deafening loud noise. Chen Tao's ears buzzed. He was stunned for a moment, then raised his face to look. The clouds in the sky dispersed, and there was a huge red circle in the sky. It's like a vision of heaven and earth. What's going on? Number 1 used a micronuclear bomb. Nebula's voice came. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. A miniature nuclear bomb? Chen Tao said, will micronuclear bombs cause nuclear radiation pollution? This is an improved and compressed micronuclear bomb that will not cause nuclear radiation pollution. Nebula's voice came. Chen Tao nodded slightly and looked not far away. Number 1 was covered in white steam, but the Z2 material was still intact. The hardness of the Z2 material was somewhat surprising. Chen Tao said, Number 1, that's enough, come back. Number 1 heard Chen Tao's order, retracted all her weapons, changed into professional clothes, flew down, and landed next to Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Lan Ruliu beside him. Lan Ruliu fell to the ground, her eyes fixed on the red circle in the sky. Her eyes looked at Number 1, her face changed, and she hurriedly stood up. Zhao Gang supported Lan Ruliu. Seeing Lan Ruliu frightened and embarrassed, Chen Tao said, now, you should understand the gap between our technology, right? Lan Ruliu looked at Chen Tao with a calm face. She opened her mouth, nodded slightly, and said, I understand. Chen Tao said, Number 1, send Miss Lan back. Number 1 nodded slightly. A micro-wormhole appeared next to Number 1. Number 1 looked at Lan Ruliu, with a friendly professional smile on his face, and said, Miss Lan, please. Lan Ruliu looked at no one's gentle smile, and her face turned slightly pale. Before, Lan Ruliu felt that Number 1 was a polite robot, but now it seems that this robot is simply a human-shaped nuclear bomb. The energy is too terrifying. Lan Ruliu suppressed her inner emotions. This is just Chen Tao's maid, she has to stay calm. Lan Ruliu forced a smile and said, okay. Number 1 sent Lan Ruliu and the others through the micro-wormhole and left. Looking at this scene, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. This micro-wormhole is a very dangerous thing, but Lan Ruliu and the others went in directly. I guess Number 1 didn't make it clear when he brought them here. Lan Ruliu and the others just thought it was a portal or something like that. Tao, can I see those fighters? A voice came from the side. Chen Tao was slightly startled. He looked at Wu Yao. Wu Yao looked at those fighters, her eyes were shining. This tech fan, Chen Tao said, okay. Wu Yao hummed, she kissed Chen Tao's cheek, and said with a smile, then I'll go over. She hurriedly trotted and ran towards the direction of the fighters. Looking at Wu Yao's back, Chen Tao crossed his arms. Dear, what are you going to do? He Yuxuan's voice came from beside him. Chen Tao turned his head to look at He Yuxuan, his eyebrows slightly stretched, and he smiled, saying, what should I do? Of course, it's like now. Eat when you are hungry, sleep when you want to sleep, and watch the scenery when you want to watch the scenery. Chen Tao stood on the edge of the battleship, looking at the vast sky in front of him, and said, I am satisfied as long as I live happily and the people around me are safe and sound. Looking at Chen Tao's casual smile, He Yuxuan was slightly startled, and a smile appeared on her face.